Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. I've got for you today a pre-modern era deck called Ponza, which is named after an Italian dish. You know, it's got a little bit of cheese, a little bit of noodles, a little bit of meat, and Ponza's got a little bit of land destruction, a little bit of direct damage, some enchantment and artifact destruction, and some big creatures. And it's a really interesting deck, and it all revolves around this guy, the Magnivore. And so you'll see he's his little Lurgoyf type, and his power and toughness are equal to the number of sorceries in all graveyards. So what you do is you optimize the rest of the deck to put as many sorceries into the graveyard as you can. And it's so highly optimized to that point that there are no fast effects in this deck beyond tapping for mana. And you basically have very little control on your opponent's turn to do anything in response to them playing slow effects. So what are these cards that we use to kind of keep control? Comically, we finally get to make use of a split card. And the nice thing is both halves of these cards are castable by this deck, and both halves are useful. So obviously, Assault is worse than Shock, and it's worse than Lightning Bolt, but it's a sorcery, and that's what counts. And the cool thing is, the way the rules work on split cards, when this card is in your graveyard, it counts as 2 sorceries for your Magnivore. You've also got a couple copies of Firebolt, which again is just 2 damage. You would never play the flashback ability because you don't want to lose this card out of your graveyard. You've got Volcanic Hammer, which is strictly worse than Incinerate, but it's a sorcery, and that's what you're interested in. Most of the time, your only creature is the Magnivore. Sometimes you'll play the battery to get an elephant token, and so you need a lot of creature control. This is a pretty powerful card. I wouldn't say it's over powerful or anything, but it's pretty powerful. It's a lot of damage you can put out for just 2 mana. If it were red instead of red colorless, I would think it was a lot more appropriate. Savage Twister, I'm trying a couple of these in here. Gives you a little more control over how much you put into it when you need a little more. And it's nice that this deck has a small green component that it can support for the cards that it picks up. Now, this is the star of the show, Wildfire. You're going to be throwing away all these lands, getting rid of your opponents, and dealing 4 damage to all the creatures in play. This is really kind of the card you have your Magnivore out, and then you play this, and you essentially stop your opponent from being able to respond after you've done that. Stone Rain and Pillage, just staple land destruction cards of red. Classic. And, there's enough land destruction in this deck that you can really disrupt your opponent a lot. Hull Breach, a much-needed enchantment destruction, and a little more artifact destruction. That red already has quite a bit of artifact destruction, but this one is just really neat and versatile, the options it gives you. And then you got a couple of mana stones. You got the old Fire Diamond from Mirage and 6th edition, and the Trollhorn Cameo. And the nice thing is, you get some of these out, and then you play the Wildfire, and these survive the Wildfire. And that's the real point of having these in the deck, is that when you go through and you start destroying all the lands with Wildfire, you can keep a little bit of mana ability so you can stay ahead of your opponent. And, besides, you're casting Stone Rain and Pillage on them to take out more of their lands. So it's to keep you advantaged on the mana. Ghitu Encampment, this one's really nice because, again, it survives Pyroclasm and Wildfire and the Savage Twister, and then it turns into a creature and is able to attack. So really, this is the only fast effect that you have in the deck that's meaningful. Shivan Oasis and the Mossfire Valley, just a couple lands to help you get into your green mana when you need it. I'm not a big fan of these filter lands like Mossfire Valley. They look like they're good, but in actual play, they're kind of bad. And when you draw them in your opening hand, if they're your only land, you can't do anything because you can't activate them. So, not a huge fan, but I'm still working a lot on tweaking how many of the mana stones I have and the split of land and which ones obviously 4 Ghitu Encampments are required, and, you know, 4 of the Shivan Oases, that really doesn't hurt you, but it's the balance between the Mossfire Valleys, the Fire Diamonds, and the Trollhorn Cameos that I'm still working on, because obviously it's bad when you draw an opening hand and you have a bunch of these mana stones, but you don't have enough land to start getting them out, and it just kind of slows you down. So I don't know what the right balance is yet. When you play this deck, one of the things you have to keep in mind is you really don't want to play the Magnivore until you have enough sorceries in your graveyard. And so early on, if your opening hand has Firebolt or Assault in it, you probably just want to go ahead and play that, even if you're playing it on your opponent directly and not one of his creatures, because you need to start building up the sorceries in your graveyard. If you have a Volcanic Hammer on your second turn and you can play it, you probably want to play it. And so you've got to think ahead like that, because you don't want to hold all these cards in your hand thinking, I have all this capability, all this potential power in my hand, and I can play it when I need it. Instead, you need to be playing that stuff out to build up the sorceries in your graveyard. And just keep in mind, the Magnivore has haste that makes him even more powerful. So this deck is a lot of fun. I'm still working on tweaking it. There's a couple other great cards like Cave In that I'm looking at, and a few other staples of it that I don't have, but still working on it, and it's a nice alternative. I kind of just stumbled upon this deck, discovered it while I was doing research on land destruction, because I'm still trying to work out a land destruction deck somehow, and this is kind of as close as you can get to it and still be semi-competitive and have a powerful and fun deck. So if you like this kind of thing, you like these old vintage cards, the pre-modern tournament format, you're into this kind of stuff, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade. Thanks a lot.